If I tell you not to go upstairs, then please trust me. Because after what I've seen, I don't think there's only darkness up there. There's something else. And I might be the last person to ever tell this story. That warning might sound dramatic to you now, sitting wherever you are, safe in your own home. But I need you to understand, I didn't believe in curses, or haunted houses, or spirits hiding in the shadows. I was the kind of person who laughed at those late-night horror stories, until I moved into that house, until the stairs began to call for me. It all started a few months ago when I was desperate to find a place I could afford. The city was expensive, and everything I looked at was either way out of my budget or so cramped I could barely stretch my arms. So when I saw the listing for a 3-bedroom house at the edge of town, my first reaction was suspicion. It was cheap, too cheap. The photos online didn't look too bad. A little rundown, sure, but nothing that couldn't be fixed with some cleaning and a fresh coat of paint. The landlord sounded almost eager when I called. He barely asked any questions, just told me that if I could sign the lease that week, the house was mine. I should have realized then that something wasn't right. But when you're tired of sleeping on a friend's couch, when you're desperate for a space of your own, you stop asking questions. The day I arrived with my few boxes, I noticed how isolated the place felt. It was tucked into the corner of a narrow street, with tall hedges and leaning fences on either side. The house looked lifeless, like no one had lived there for decades. The paint was peeling, the front steps sagged under my weight, and the windows were cloudy with grime. But I told myself all of that could be fixed. Inside, the air was stale and thick, as if it hadn't been touched in years. The floors groaned under every step, and the walls were cracked in long, jagged lines that crawled toward the ceiling. Dust clung to everything. But what caught my attention almost immediately was the staircase. It stood at the far end of the hall, steep and narrow, vanishing into shadows. The wood was dark, almost black, and no matter how much light poured in from the windows, the top of the stairs seemed to swallow it whole. I remember standing there, staring up into that darkness, my chest tight with something I couldn't name. I laughed at myself. It's just a staircase, I thought. But something about it made my skin crawl. The first few days were quiet enough. I spent my time unpacking, cleaning, trying to make the place feel like home. But the neighbors, well, that was another story. Most of them avoided me. When I waved hello, they turned away. When I tried to strike up a conversation, they gave short, clipped answers. One afternoon, though, I caught the eye of an old woman who lived directly across the street. She was watering her plants, but when she saw me, she froze. "You shouldn't stay in that house," she said softly. I laughed awkwardly, unsure how to respond. "It's not so bad. Just needs some work." Her lips pressed into a thin line, and then, with a voice trembling as though the words themselves scared her, she said, "Don't go upstairs. Whatever you do, don't go upstairs." I wanted to ask her more, but she shook her head quickly, went inside, and shut the door. That night, her words echoed in my mind. Don't go upstairs. It sounded so absurd, so melodramatic. Yet when I walked past the staircase in the dim light, I couldn't help but feel her warning sink into me. The next day, while clearing out a drawer in the living room, I found something strange. It was an old notebook, worn and faded, its leather cover cracked. Inside were pages filled with messy, uneven handwriting. At first I thought it was just the ramblings of someone who had lived here before me. But then I saw a line repeated again and again, almost like a mantra. "Whatever happens, don't go upstairs. Trust me." The words were scratched into the paper, as though the writer had pressed so hard the pen nearly tore the page. I stared at it for a long time. A cold shiver ran down my spine. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard it for the first time. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, creaking across the floorboards above me. My breath caught in my throat. I told myself it was the house settling, or maybe my imagination. But deep down, I knew the house wasn't empty. Something was there. Something was waiting at the top of the stairs. I didn't sleep well after that first night. The sound of those footsteps echoed in my ears long after they stopped, looping over and over in my head. When morning came, I forced myself to laugh it off. It was an old house. Of course it made noises. Wood expands and contracts. The wind can rattle the beams. That's all it was. At least that's what I told myself. The day passed quietly. I unpacked more boxes, scrubbed the kitchen counters until they no longer felt sticky with dust, and opened the windows to let the air move through the rooms. Everything seemed fine, almost normal. But when the sun dipped below the horizon, when the shadows stretched across the floors and walls, I began to dread the night. I avoided looking at the staircase, but it was impossible not to feel it there. It seemed to loom in the corner of my vision no matter where I went. Every time I passed it, I felt as though something just beyond the darkness was watching me. By the time I got into bed, exhaustion was pulling at me, but my nerves wouldn't let me rest. And then, just as I began to drift off, there it was again. Creak. The unmistakable sound of a footstep above me. I froze. My heart began pounding so loudly it drowned out everything else. Another creak followed, then another, a slow, deliberate rhythm of weight pressing down on the floorboards. I sat up, straining to hear. It was coming from directly above my bedroom. I told myself it couldn't be footsteps. Maybe an animal had gotten inside, rats or raccoons in the attic. That was easier to believe than the thought of someone walking around up there. But the pattern, the way the boards groaned under pressure, it was too heavy, too human. Eventually, the sounds stopped. I lay awake for hours, waiting for them to start again. They never did. The next morning, I tried to laugh at myself. I even joked aloud while making coffee. Congratulations, you've officially scared yourself into hearing things. But my voice sounded hollow in the empty kitchen. That afternoon, I went outside to check the mailbox, and once again, I saw the old woman across the street. She was standing on her porch, staring at the house. When she noticed me, she shook her head slowly, almost sadly, and went back inside without a word. I wanted to chase after her, to demand answers, but something stopped me. Maybe part of me was afraid of what she would say. Later, while dusting the living room shelves, I stumbled upon the notebook again. This time I flipped through more of its pages. The handwriting grew more frantic with each entry. The words leaned and scratched across the paper, sometimes smeared as if written in a panic. One entry in particular made my skin crawl. I hear it at night, the steps, the whispers. It wants me to come upstairs. It's patient, too patient. But I won't go. I won't let it in. On the next page, in large letters that nearly tore through the paper, "Don't go upstairs, don't look at it, please." I shut the notebook quickly, my hands trembling. That night I tried to drown out my thoughts with the television. I kept the volume low, just enough for background noise. Hours passed, midnight came and went. And then, over the hum of the TV, I heard it again. Creak. A single footstep, then another. This time, the sound was clearer than ever. There was no mistaking it. Someone was upstairs. I stood frozen in the living room, staring at the ceiling as each step moved slowly across the floor. I could almost picture the path, the invisible intruder pacing steadily above me. I considered calling the police, but what would I say? That my empty house was making noises? That I'd found a diary telling me not to go upstairs? They'd laugh, maybe even accuse me of wasting their time. The steps stopped after a few minutes. The silence that followed was worse, because silence meant waiting. Silence meant it was listening, too. I sat there until the first light of dawn crept through the curtains. Only then did I finally allow myself to close my eyes. But when I woke later that morning, something new had changed. The door at the top of the stairs, the one that had always been shut tight, now stood slightly open, just a sliver, just enough for darkness to seep out. My throat tightened as I stared at it from below, and for the first time since moving in, I realized something horrifying. The house wasn't just old, it wasn't just noisy, it was waiting.
The door at the top of the stairs was open. Not wide, not enough to see what was inside, but just enough to change everything. I stared at it for what felt like hours, frozen at the bottom of the staircase. A sliver of blackness leaked out like smoke, thick and heavy, pressing down on the air. It made my lungs feel tight, as though simply breathing near that doorway was dangerous. I told myself I should shut it. That's what anyone would do, right? Climb the stairs, push it closed, lock it tight. But every time I thought about setting my foot on the first step, something deep in my gut screamed at me not to. It wasn't fear like the kind you feel when you hear a bump in the night. It was primal, like the instinct to pull your hand back from fire. My body knew that going up there was wrong. I backed away instead, whispering to myself, "It's fine. It's just a door. It's just the wind." But when I turned away, I swore I heard something shift above. Just a scrape, like wood dragging across the floor. The rest of the day, I couldn't focus on anything. I tried reading. I tried cleaning. I even tried leaving the house to take a walk. But no matter where I went, I felt the weight of that half-open door pressing down on me. By the time night fell, my nerves were raw. I left the lights on in every room. Maybe that would help. Maybe the glow would push the shadows back. I sat on the couch with the television humming again, but it was useless. The air felt charged, tense, as though the house itself was holding its breath. And then it began. Creak. The footsteps were back, but this time they weren't pacing. They went slow and measured. They were moving deliberately, steadily toward the top of the stairs. I sat frozen, my eyes glued to the ceiling as the boards groaned under invisible weight. Step after step. I could trace the exact path in my head. From one side of the room upstairs, across the floor, toward the open door, and then see a silence so deep it roared in my ears. I swallowed hard, every muscle in my body rigid, and then I heard it. A whisper. So faint I thought at first it was my imagination. But no, it was real. A breathy murmur curling down the stairwell. I couldn't make out the words, but I knew, without doubt, it was calling to me. I clapped my hands over my ears, shaking my head. No! No! You're not real. You're not real. But then came something worse. Tap. A soft, deliberate knock from the inside of the upstairs room. Once, twice, 3 times. I wanted to run, to leave the house, and never come back, but my legs wouldn't move. My body betrayed me, rooted to the couch, while terror burned through me. Finally, the knocking stopped. I don't know when I fell asleep, if I even truly did. But when I opened my eyes, it was morning. Pale sunlight stretched across the living room floor. Everything was quiet. I thought maybe, just maybe, it had been a nightmare. That's when I noticed something on the coffee table. The notebook! But I hadn't left it there. I'd shoved it into a drawer the day before. My hand shook as I opened it. A new entry had been scrawled across the page in dark, uneven strokes. I told you not to look. Now it knows you. I dropped the notebook, my chest tightening with panic. My mind tried to find some logical explanation, sleepwalking, memory lapse, anything but I knew the truth. I hadn't written those words. I spent the rest of the day avoiding the staircase. Every time I passed through the hole, I kept my head down, refusing to glance upward. But even when I wasn't looking, I could feel it. The open door, the blackness inside, watching. That night, I barricaded myself in my bedroom. I pushed a chair under the doorknob, shut the curtains tight, and left the lamp burning beside me. Sleep came in fragmentally, uneasy, broken by every creak of the house. At some point in the darkness, I heard it again. Not footsteps this time. Breathing right above me. Long, slow, deliberate breaths, as though something was lying flat on the floorboards of the upstairs room, its face pressed against the wood, listening to me as I slept below. I buried my head under the blanket, squeezing my eyes shut, praying for it to end. When morning finally came, the breathing was gone, but the upstairs door was open wider.
By the 4th morning, the upstairs door was wide enough that I could see into the room beyond. Not clearly, just a shadowy glimpse of the floorboards and the faint outline of a window covered by tattered curtains. But that sliver of a view was enough to send a jolt of dread through me, because I knew without question that I hadn't touched the door. Something was opening it. And whatever it was, it wanted me to notice. I told myself I couldn't live like this. I had to leave. Pack my things, walk away, never look back. It didn't matter how cheap the rent was, or how desperate I'd been when I signed the lease. No one deserves to live in a house where the walls breathe and the shadows whisper. I began throwing things into boxes, my hands clumsy and shaking, but the deeper I got into it, the stronger the resistance inside me grew. Not resistance from myself, but from the house. The floorboards seemed to groan louder, the air pressing heavier on my chest, as though the walls were trying to smother me. At one point I swore I heard the faint click of a lock turning upstairs. I froze, clutching a half-filled box, my heart thundering. The sound hadn't come from my room. It hadn't come from the front door. It came from that room, the one beyond the open door. I couldn't explain it, but I felt the message clearly. You can't leave. Not yet. I dropped the box, stumbling back toward the living room. My eyes landed on the notebook again, sitting exactly where I'd left it on the table. Against my better judgment, I opened it. There were more words now, scrawled in the same frantic hand as before. You can't escape it. It waits. It always waits. Beneath that, another line. When the door is open, it can see you. When it can see you, it learns you. When it learns you, it follows. I slammed the book shut, bile rising in my throat. My skin felt like it was crawling with invisible insects. That night, I didn't even try to sleep. I sat in the living room with every light burning, my body trembling with exhaustion, but my eyes wide, refusing to close. Midnight came, then 1, then 2, and that's when I heard it. Not footsteps, not whispers, something else, a dragging sound, like bare feet sliding across the floorboards. It started upstairs, slow, heavy, uneven, the sound of something moving across the room. My body stiffened. My gaze locked on the staircase, where shadows pooled like liquid. The dragging sound reached the top of the stairs. Then, it paused. I sat frozen, my mouth dry, the air stuck in my lungs. And then the sound began again. Thump, drag, thump, drag. Descending, coming down the stairs. Each step rattled the wood. Each drag scraped like sandpaper against my nerves. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My eyes locked onto the staircase as the sound drew closer and closer. Halfway down. 3/4. And then, silence. The sound stopped. I leaned forward slightly, my hands shaking uncontrollably, waiting for something, anything, to emerge from the shadows. But nothing came. The stairs were empty. The silence stretched on for so long it felt unbearable. And then, slowly, I realized something that made my blood run cold. The sound hadn't stopped. It had only grown quieter. Because now, it was inside the living room. I couldn't see it, couldn't hear it clearly, but I could feel it. The air shifted as though something vast and heavy moved just beyond the corner of my vision. My skin prickled, the hair on my arms rising. I squeezed my eyes shut, whispering to myself over and over, "It's not real. It's not real. It's not real." When I finally opened them again, the room was empty, but the notebook lay open on the table. I hadn't touched it. Across the page, a new sentence had been written in jagged strokes. "Why don't you come upstairs?" I slammed the notebook shut and shoved it across the table as if it were burning me. My entire body shook. I couldn't stay here another night. I wouldn't. I stumbled to my bedroom, grabbed the keys from the dresser, and headed for the front door. My hands were trembling so badly it took 3 tries to fit the key into the lock. Finally, the door swung open, and waiting for me on the porch was the old woman from across the street. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with something that looked a lot like pity. "You've opened it," she whispered. "God help you. You've already opened it." The old woman's words sank into me like ice. "You've opened it." I shook my head violently. "No, I didn't. I haven't even gone upstairs. I haven't." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "You don't have to. The moment you noticed the door, the moment you listened to it, that was enough." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You have to leave. Tonight. Don't pack. Don't turn back. Just go." Her urgency should have jolted me into motion, but all I felt was confusion. My hands trembled on the doorknob. "What is it? What's in that room?" Her eyes flicked toward the dark staircase visible through the doorway. The open gap at the top loomed like a black mouth, swallowing light. She shivered. "It isn't a room anymore." Before I could ask what she meant, a sound cracked through the silence. A long, slow creak. A single step. From upstairs. The woman's eyes widened with terror. She backed away from the porch. "Too late," she whispered. "It knows you're leaving." She turned and hurried across the street without another word, leaving me frozen in the doorway, staring at the staircase. The house groaned. The air thickened, heavy as wet cloth. And then came the sound again. A dull thump, then a dragging noise, another thump, another drag. Coming down the stairs. Not slow this time, faster, more eager. I slammed the front door shut and locked it. My breath came in gasps, my chest aching. The steps grew louder, closer, the dragging scraping like nails inside my skull. Halfway down, 3/4, I stumbled back into the living room, knocking over a lamp. The bulb shattered, plunging one corner of the room into darkness. The steps reached the bottom of the staircase. And then, silence. I held my breath, staring at the shadows that pooled at the edge of the hallway. Nothing moved. Nothing appeared. And then, the notebook slid across the table by itself. It stopped right in front of me. My trembling hand reached out against my will, flipping the cover open. The pages turned rapidly, faster and faster, until they stopped on a blank sheet. Words carved themselves into the paper, as if an invisible hand were etching them with a blade. "You're already upstairs." My body went rigid. The walls seemed to twist around me, the ceiling stretching higher, the floor groaning beneath my feet. For a dizzying moment, I couldn't tell where I was. The living room blurred, the shadows deepened, and then I realized the window beside me was gone. The door behind me was gone. The entire room had shifted. I was standing in the upstairs hallway. The door that had always been cracked open now stood wide. The darkness inside so absolute it swallowed every trace of light. A voice whispered from within. Soft, gentle, familiar. "Come in." My legs moved forward without my permission. I tried to fight it, tried to dig my heels into the floor, but the pull was stronger than me. The shadows clung to my skin like oil, dragging me toward the doorway. I crossed the threshold. The air inside was colder, damp, as though the room had been sealed for centuries. The floorboards sagged under my weight, groaning like something alive. And in the far corner, hunched and twisted, something moved. It was human-shaped, but wrong. Too long, too thin. Its limbs bent at impossible angles, its head cocked unnaturally far to the side. I couldn't see its face, but I didn't need to. The recognition hit me instantly. It had been here all along, waiting, watching, learning. The thing straightened, its joints cracking like breaking branches, and then, in a voice that sounded almost like mine, it whispered, "You shouldn't have opened the door." The darkness surged forward. I screamed, and then silence. The house stood still on the quiet street. The staircase stretched upward into shadow. The upstairs door closed once again, as if it had never been open. Across the street, the old woman stood at her window watching. Her lips trembled as she whispered to no one. "Another one gone."